7 vegetables the Amish refuse to grow and why they're right. Section 1. The garden that fed 11 people from a patch smaller than your living room. There is a family in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that feeds 11 people every single day of the year from a garden you could fit inside most suburban living rooms. Not 11 people during summer. Not 11 people when things are easy and tomatoes are falling off the vine. 11 people through January, through February, through the long, gray stretch of winter when the ground is frozen solid and the nearest grocery store might as well be on another planet. And here is the part that stops people cold when they hear it. The garden is only 40 feet by 60 feet. That is 2,400 square feet. A 2-car garage is bigger than that. Most people's backyards dwarf that size. And yet from that one small patch of earth, plus a potato field out back, this family pulls enough food to stay fed from the first frost all the way through April without a single trip to a store. Now here is what makes this even more surprising. When a gardener from outside the community stood there looking at that garden for the first time, he expected to see a bursting, overflowing display of vegetables. He expected the kind of thing you see on the cover of a seed catalog. Rows of corn stretching up over his head. Big, ruffled cauliflower heads. Purple eggplants hanging heavy on the stem. Fancy lettuce in a dozen colors. He saw none of that. What he saw instead looked almost plain. Almost boring, and he almost made a joke about it before the woman who owned that garden walked him down into the cellar. What was in that cellar shut him up completely. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with jars, cabbage heads wrapped in newspaper, stacked in crates, each one the size of a basketball, potatoes in burlap sacks filling an entire wall, winter squash stacked 3 deep, dried beans in 5-gallon buckets, carrots buried in damp sand, onions hanging in braids from hooks in the ceiling beams. He stood there looking at enough food to carry a family of 11 through 6 months of winter, and he could not quite believe that most of it came from that little patch he had just walked through. He had been gardening for over 25 years at that point. He had read every book. He had ordered from every seed catalog. He had spent money on drip irrigation and row covers and grow lights that cost more than some people's car payments, and he had never, not once, come close to producing that kind of result. The difference was not a secret seed. It was not a magic fertilizer. It was not some ancient technique only the Amish know. The difference was 7 vegetables. 7 vegetables he was growing, 7 vegetables they were not growing. And the gap between his garden and their cellar came down almost entirely to that list. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what those 7 vegetables are, why the Amish walked away from them, what they grow instead, and the specific math behind why those swaps work so well. You will also get one storage technique from a 75-year-old Amish grandmother that no gardening book has ever mentioned, and it will change the way you think about cabbage forever. Before we get into the list, I want you to understand something about the way the Amish think about a garden. Because without that piece, the 7 vegetables just feel like a random list of things to avoid. With that piece, the whole thing clicks into place, and you will never look at your seed catalog the same way again. And if you want more videos like this one, go ahead and hit subscribe right now. I go deep into traditional gardening wisdom from communities that have been keeping people alive through hard winters for generations. These are not gardening tips you will find in a magazine at the checkout line. These are lessons that come from families who could not afford to get it wrong. That is the kind of knowledge I want to share with you here. And new videos come out every single week. Hit the bell too, so you never miss one. Section 2. The question that changes everything. Most of us approach our garden with a question we have never even spoken out loud. We do not realize we are asking it because it feels so obvious. The question is, what do I want to eat this summer? That is the question sitting behind almost every seed catalog order ever placed. What sounds good? What looks beautiful in the picture? What did I enjoy eating at a restaurant last month? What vegetable would be fun to try growing this year? And that question is the reason most home gardens produce a lot of food in July that nobody knows what to do with, and almost nothing useful by November. The Amish ask a completely different question. Their question is, what will feed us in February? Those two questions sound similar on the surface. They are actually pointing in completely opposite directions. The first question is about pleasure and variety and the excitement of summer. The second question is about survival and storage and the long, cold reality of winter. When you start with the first question, you end up with a garden full of things that taste great fresh, spoil in a week, and cannot be stored without a lot of freezer space or extra work. When you start with the second question, you end up with a cellar that looks like the one that stopped that gardener cold in Lancaster County. There is a concept in Amish culture that describes a kind of practical wisdom. It is the idea of letting go of what you want and yielding to what is actually needed. Out in the garden, it means you do not plant what you crave. You plant what your family needs to stay fed when the weather turns and the stores are far away and you are living off what you put up last fall. That sounds like a sacrifice. But here is what happens when you actually live that way in the garden. You stop wasting space. You stop wasting water. You stop wasting work. You stop spending August canning 12 varieties of heirloom tomatoes that your family cannot eat fast enough before they go soft. You stop pulling bolted cauliflower out of the ground in frustration. You stop fighting raccoons over sweet corn all summer, only to end up with a couple dozen decent ears that are gone by the end of the week. And you start growing things that produce hundreds of pounds of food you can actually store on a shelf, in a crate, in a cool corner of your basement all winter long. A research team at Cornell University studied caloric return per square foot in small-scale home gardens. They measured how many actual usable calories each vegetable produces from a given area of ground over the course of a full season. The top 5 producers on that list were potatoes, winter squash, dry beans, cabbage, and onions. At the bottom of the list were sweet corn, lettuce, and cauliflower. The Amish did not need that study. They figured this out through generations of keeping large families alive through Pennsylvania winters. The research just confirmed what their grandmothers already knew. Now let us talk about the 7 vegetables, and I promise at least 2 of these are going to surprise you. Section 3. The 7 vegetables, and what to grow instead. Number 1. Sweet corn. This one hits hard because sweet corn feels like the most American vegetable that exists. It feels like summer. It feels like cookouts and farmers' markets and the whole romance of a backyard garden. I understand. I felt that way for years. But here is what sweet corn actually costs you, measured in the one currency that matters most in a serious food garden: square footage. To grow sweet corn properly, you need to plant it in a block. Corn is wind-pollinated, which means it needs other corn plants nearby to produce ears. The minimum block most extension services recommend is 4 rows by 4 rows, which is at least 16 plants taking up 16 or more square feet once you account for proper spacing. Most serious gardeners plant way more than that. Now think about what you get back from those 16 plants, maybe 2 ears per stalk on a good year. That is 32 ears of corn from 16 square feet of your best garden space, tended from late spring all the way through late July or August. And here is the part nobody puts in the seed catalog photo. You have to eat it almost immediately. The sugar in sweet corn starts converting to starch the moment it is picked. Within 24 hours, a really good ear of corn has already lost a big chunk of what makes it taste sweet. To keep it, you have to freeze it or can it. Frozen corn takes up precious freezer space. Canned corn is frankly nothing special. The Amish do grow corn. They grow field corn for their animals and for cornmeal. But the sugary sweet corn we are talking about, they look at that math and they put potatoes in that space instead. Here is what potatoes give you from that same 16 square feet. Planted correctly with seed potatoes set about 12 inches apart in rows about 2 feet wide, you can fit 20 to 25 plants in that space. A single healthy potato plant produces between 1 and 2 pounds of potatoes. That gives you somewhere between 20 and 50 pounds of potatoes from the same ground where your corn was struggling. And those potatoes will sit in a cool, dark cellar for 6 months without any processing, without any electricity, without any canning jars. You just put them somewhere dark and cool, and they wait for you. A trial at the University of Wisconsin found that sweet corn returns around 400 calories per square foot per growing season. Potatoes in the same space return over 2,000 calories. That is 5 times more food from the same dirt. The family in Lancaster County pulls 340 pounds of potatoes out of their small garden every year. 340 pounds, from a plot smaller than most people's living rooms. That number did not come from growing sweet corn. It came from making the swap. If you are in zones 3 and 4, sweet corn is also a gamble every single year because your frost-free window is short. In zones 5 through 7, you can get a decent crop, but you are still taking up a huge amount of space for a very narrow harvest window. In zones 8 and 9, the corn earworm pressure alone will test your patience all summer long. I stopped growing sweet corn 3 years ago. I put potatoes where my corn patch used to be. My winter food storage went from about 50 pounds to over 200 pounds. I did not work any harder. I did not buy any new equipment. I just changed what I planted. Number 2, cauliflower. This one is personal for me because I tried to grow good cauliflower for 15 years straight. 15 years. And I could never quite figure out why it kept failing me. The answer is that cauliflower is one of the most demanding, finicky, difficult vegetables in the entire garden. It needs exactly the right temperature at exactly the right time. Too warm and it bolts before the head even forms. Too cold and it buttons up into a tiny, useless knob the size of a golf ball. It needs consistent moisture, very specific day lengths, and you actually have to go out and physically tie the outer leaves over the developing head to block the sun, or the head turns yellow and bitter. This step is called blanching, and it is something you have to do by hand, head by head, on exactly the right day. One hot week and your entire cauliflower planting is ruined. I have watched entire rows bolt in 4 days during a late spring heat wave. All that work, all that space, all gone in one warm weekend. The Amish grow cabbage instead. Every single time. Cabbage is a close cousin of cauliflower. They are in the same plant family. They grow in the same conditions, and they like the same cool weather and regular water. But here is what makes cabbage completely different. It is bulletproof. A cabbage plant is not going to bolt on you because of one warm week. It is not going to button up into a useless nub. It is going to sit there in your garden and get bigger and denser through the whole cool season. And then you cut it, wrap it in newspaper, put it in a cardboard box in your basement, and eat it all the way through winter. Researchers at Oregon State compared cabbage and cauliflower on a straight productivity basis. Cabbage produced about 3 times the usable weight per plant compared to cauliflower, and it required about 1/4 of the labor. 3 times the food, 1/4 of the work. Sarah's sister-in-law, who gardens in Holmes County, Ohio, shared something her mother used to say. Cauliflower is for people who have time to be disappointed. 15 years of failed cauliflower told me she was exactly right. If you are in zones 3 and 4, your short season makes cauliflower an even bigger gamble. In zones 5 through 7, it is possible but painful. In zones 8 and 9, the summer heat will cook the curds before they ever get the chance to form properly. In every zone, cabbage is the smarter bet. Number 3, eggplant. I want to be honest with you about eggplant because I genuinely love eating it. Eggplant parmesan, baba ganoush, roasted with olive oil and salt. I spent years trying to grow big, beautiful Italian globe eggplants in my backyard because I wanted to walk out the back door and cook with them. Here is the reality that finally broke through after years of trying. Eggplant is a warm season crop that wants hot days and warm nights. It is a heavy feeder, which means it pulls a lot of nutrients out of your soil. It is very attractive to flea beetles, which will riddle the leaves with tiny holes and stress the plant from the time it goes in the ground. It is also vulnerable to a soil disease called verticillium wilt that can wipe out an entire planting and linger in your soil for years. And after all of that, after fighting the bugs and feeding the soil and nursing the plants through cool nights, a single eggplant plant gives you maybe 6 to 8 fruits over the whole season if things go well. You cannot can eggplant in any meaningful way. It gets mushy and strange in texture. You can freeze it if it is breaded, but that takes up freezer space, and the result is pretty mediocre. There is no version of eggplant that stores beautifully through winter without a lot of extra work. The Amish grow zucchini and summer squash in that space instead, and the difference in output is almost hard to believe until you see it. A single healthy zucchini plant, well watered and given enough sun, will produce fruit continuously for months. We are talking about weeks and weeks of harvests from one plant. The excess gets shredded and frozen for winter baking. Zucchini bread in January. Shredded zucchini in soups, fritters, casseroles. The frozen shredded squash holds up beautifully and takes up far less freezer space than you would expect because you squeeze the water out before freezing. Eli, the husband on that Lancaster County farm, said something about eggplant that I wrote down in my truck on the way home that evening. He said a plant that gives you 6 meals does not earn its soil. 6 meals versus months of continuous harvest. That math is not even close. In zones 3 and 4, eggplant barely has time to reach full production before the first frost shuts everything down. In zones 5 through 7, you will get some harvest, but the labor-to-yield ratio is brutal. In zones 8 and 9, it will grow, but the bug pressure is relentless, and the yields still do not justify the space. Number 4. Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts have had a real moment in the last decade. Roasted in a hot oven with a little olive oil and some bacon, they are genuinely delicious. I get why people love them, and I get why gardeners want to grow them. But here is the problem with Brussels sprouts in a real working food garden. They take a very long time. We are talking about 100 days or more from transplant to harvest. During all of those 100+ days, each plant is sitting in your garden taking up about 3 square feet of prime real estate. And at the end of all that waiting, a single plant gives you maybe 30 or 40 sprouts per stalk. Now think about what you could grow in that same 3 square feet over that same stretch of time. The Amish grow cabbage. And this is where the comparison gets almost funny. A cabbage head is essentially one enormous Brussels sprout. Botanically, they are almost the same thing. But instead of getting 30 or 40 little sprouts from 3 square feet over 100+ days, you get one large cabbage head that can weigh anywhere from 5 to 15 pounds. That single head represents the same amount of eating as 100 small Brussels sprouts, and it stores whole for up to 6 months on a shelf without any processing at all. Researchers at the University of Vermont who studied cold, hardy vegetables found that on a pound per square foot basis, cabbage outproduces Brussels sprouts by a factor of about 4 to 1. 4 pounds of cabbage for every 1 pound of Brussels sprouts from the same amount of ground. If you are in zones 3 or 4, you actually do have one natural advantage with Brussels sprouts because they need a hard frost to sweeten up properly, and you will definitely get one. But the yield question still stands regardless of your zone. In zones 5 through 7, growing Brussels sprouts means tying up your ground from May all the way through November. In zones 8 and 9, they simply do not get cold enough to develop their best flavor. Number 5. Artichokes. This one might feel like I am piling on because most home gardeners do not even attempt artichokes. But I see it enough in gardening communities online, and I have met enough Zone 6 and 7 gardeners who are absolutely determined to make it work that I want to address it directly. In warm climates, Zones 8 and warmer, artichokes are perennials. They come back every year. They can grow quite large, and they are genuinely beautiful plants. If you are in zone 8 or 9 and you have the space and you understand that you are growing more of a garden feature than a food crop, fine, go ahead. They are gorgeous. But anywhere colder than zone 8, you are growing artichokes as an annual. And as an annual, the math is brutal. Each plant spreads to about 4 feet across. That is 16 square feet per plant minimum. The plant takes all season to establish and produce. And at the end of all that growing, all that space, and all that water, you get maybe 6 to 8 edible buds per plant. Each bud is mostly leaves that you pull off and scrape with your teeth. The actual edible heart at the center is a fraction of the whole thing. When you measure artichokes by actual usable calories per square foot, they come in at the very bottom of the list. Below lettuce, below cucumbers, below almost everything else you could grow in that space. Sarah had a phrase for crops like artichokes. She called them garnish crops, things you grow to put on top of real food. And real food, she said, is what feeds you in February. If you are in zones 3 through 7, and you are serious about producing food, that 16 square feet belongs to something else. Plant potatoes. Plant a second bed of storage cabbage. Plant a row of winter squash. Do anything other than give it to a plant that will reward you with 6 edible thistles. Number 6. Fancy lettuce. Now here is where I want to be careful because the Amish do grow some lettuce. They grow it in small batches in spring and again in fall. A little bit for fresh eating when the garden is just waking up, and a little bit in the cool of October. That makes sense. Fresh greens in April taste like a gift after a long winter. What they refuse to grow is everything beyond that. The mesclun mixes, the radicchio, the baby arugula, the specialty Asian greens, the 7 varieties of butterhead that the catalog makes sound irresistible. All of that gets a hard no. The reason is simple and unarguable. Lettuce is 95% water. It stores for approximately 6 days before it starts to wilt and yellow. You cannot can it. You cannot freeze it in any useful form. You cannot dry it. You cannot do anything with surplus lettuce except feed it to animals or throw it on the compost pile, because there is no version of stored lettuce that is worth eating. Every square foot you give to a long-term lettuce planting is a square foot that cannot give you anything you can eat in February. The Amish eat cabbage slaw all winter instead of salad. They eat pickled cabbage. They eat cooked cabbage in soups and stews. They eat fermented cabbage. They get all the texture and brightness of a salad from a vegetable that stores for 6 months instead of 6 days. Researchers at the University of California compared water use efficiency between leafy greens and storage crops. Cabbage delivers roughly 12 times the edible calories per gallon of irrigation water compared to head lettuce. 12 times. From the same water. From the same sized piece of ground. That is not a small gap. That is the difference between a garden that feeds you and a garden that keeps you busy. In zones 3 and 4, your window for lettuce is short anyway. In zones 5 through 7, you can get good spring and fall crops, and a little of that is worth having. But dedicating real garden space to ongoing lettuce production is a trade-off that costs you far more than it gives back. In zones 8 and 9, lettuce bolts the moment it gets warm, which means your window is even shorter. Grow a little. Enjoy it when it is there. Just do not let it crowd out the things that will carry you through winter. Number 7. Jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. This last one genuinely surprised me the first time I heard it, and I think it will surprise you too. The Amish grow enormous amounts of winter squash. Huge amounts. Hubbards the size of small children. Butternut squash stacked in crates reaching the ceiling. Delicata and kabocha piled in corners. They love their winter squash, and they grow it seriously. What they do not grow is the big orange Halloween pumpkin you carve a face into and put on your porch in October. At first, that sounds almost funny. It is a pumpkin. How different can it be from the winter squash they are growing in such quantity? The difference is enormous. Jack-o'-lantern pumpkins were developed and selected over many generations to look a certain way. Big, round, bright orange, smooth skin, dramatic on a porch. They were not selected to taste good. The flesh inside a typical carving pumpkin is stringy and watery and low in sugar. If you cook it, it is pretty bland. You can eat it, but it is not something you would choose to eat if you had better options. And the vines. Jack-o'-lantern pumpkin vines will run 15 feet or more in every direction. A few plants can take over an enormous area of your garden. You end up with a lot of vine, a lot of leaves, and at the end of the season, a decoration. Eli looked at his butternut patch while explaining this and said something that has stuck with me ever since. He pointed at his butternuts and said, "These feed us." He gestured toward where someone else had some orange carving pumpkins growing at the edge of the property and said, "Those feed a porch step." A butternut squash is everything a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin is not. The flesh is dense and sweet and rich. It gets sweeter the longer it cures after harvest. It stores on a shelf at room temperature for up to 6 months without any processing. No canning required, no freezer required, no electricity required. You pick it, you let it cure for 2 weeks in a warm spot, and then you stack it on a shelf, and it just waits there for you, getting better over time. You can make pies from it, soups, roasted side dishes, baby food, pasta filling, risotto. Anything you would make from a butternut tastes better than anything you would make from a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. Hubbard squash is another one the Amish favor heavily. A single large blue Hubbard can weigh 15 pounds or more, stores just as well as butternut, and has rich, dense, sweet flesh that works in everything from soups to pies to simple roasted dishes. In every zone from 3 through 9, if you are going to grow pumpkins or squash, grow butternuts or Hubbards or delicata. Leave the orange carving pumpkins to the farm stand down the road that sells them for $5 each in October. Section 4. The 4 patterns that are costing you your harvest. Now that you know the 7 vegetables, I want to show you something bigger, because the 7 vegetables are just symptoms of 4 patterns that most of us fall into without realizing it. Fix the patterns and your whole garden changes. Not just those 7 crops, but everything you plant. Pattern 1. Planting for variety instead of calories. Every February, millions of gardeners sit down with a seed catalog and start circling things that look interesting. This tomato, that pepper. Oh, this squash looks incredible. I have never tried growing tomatillos. This could be the year. This is planning for variety. It feels productive. It feels exciting, and it results in a garden full of a little bit of everything, none of which you have enough of to actually get through winter. The Amish plan for storage. They look at every crop through one lens. How much of this can I put away, and how long will it last? A University of Maine study on homestead food security found that gardens planned around caloric storage produced roughly 4 times the winter food supply of gardens planned around fresh eating using the exact same square footage. 4 times more food from the same space, just by changing what you decide to grow. The fix is simple, but requires a real shift in mindset. Before you order any seed, ask yourself this: can I store this in November? Can I eat it in February? If the answer is no, how much of your precious garden space do you actually want to give it? Pattern 2. Planting what you like to eat in summer instead of winter. Summer is when we are in the garden. Summer is when we are thinking about garden food. So naturally, summer is when we decide what to grow. But summer is the wrong season to be planning around. The Amish plant for winter because winter is when food actually matters. Summer has fresh food everywhere. Farmers' markets, friends with gardens, fruit stands. The abundance of summer means that what you grow in summer is competing with 1,000 other sources of fresh food. Winter is when your pantry stands alone. When I started planning my garden from the question of what do I want to eat in January instead of what do I want to pick in July, everything changed. I started growing more potatoes, more winter squash, more storage onions, more dry beans, more cabbage. I started growing less of everything that tastes great fresh and stores for nothing. My grocery bill during the winter months dropped by about 40% the first year I made that switch. Not because I grew more food by quantity, because I grew the right food. Pattern 3. Giving equal space to every crop. There is something psychologically appealing about a garden where every crop gets its fair share of space. 4 beds for tomatoes, 4 beds for squash, 4 beds for beans, 4 beds for greens. Everything even, everything balanced. But a balanced garden is not the same as a productive garden. The Amish give the most space to the highest producers. Potatoes get the biggest plot, cabbage gets the next biggest. Winter squash gets a corner where the vines can sprawl without crowding anything important. The small fiddly crops, the peppers and fresh herbs and specialty tomatoes, those get tucked into small corners and raised beds where they can do their thing without taking up ground that could grow 50 pounds of potatoes. Space allocation should match caloric return, not personal preference. If potatoes give you 5 times more food per square foot than sweet corn, and you are giving them equal space, you are leaving most of your garden's potential sitting unused. Lean toward your biggest producers. Let your highest return crops take up the most room. The rest fills in around the edges. Pattern 4. Buying new seeds. Every year. This one is worth its own video, but I want to mention it here because it connects directly to the vegetable choices the Amish make. Most of us buy new seeds from a catalog every spring. The catalog is beautiful and full of new varieties, and it is genuinely hard to resist. I know because I spent decades doing exactly this. The Amish save seed from the best plants every year. They select the biggest, healthiest, most productive specimens from their best-performing plants, and they save those seeds for next spring. Over generations, this process develops varieties that are perfectly adapted to their specific soil, their specific microclimate, and their specific conditions. That 14-pound cabbage that stopped the visiting gardener cold, that seed line had been in that family for 6 generations. 6 generations of selection for size, storage quality, and cold hardiness. You cannot buy that in a catalog at any price. It was grown there, in that soil, by that family. You do not need 6 generations to start seeing results from seed saving. Even a few years of selecting your best plants and saving their seeds starts to produce noticeable improvements in the crops that matter most to you. Section 5. The cabbage in a box trick that no gardening book has ever mentioned. I promised you a technique from an Amish grandmother that you will not find in any gardening guide, and I want to make sure you walk away with this because it is genuinely useful and almost nobody knows it. Her name is Rebecca. She must have been around 75 years old when she shared this. Hands like old leather from 6 decades of garden work. Hair tucked up under her cap. She shared this while standing in a mudroom off the back of her house, pointing at a plain cardboard box on the floor. The problem she solved is this. Most people who grow cabbage lose a big percentage of their crop to rot or dehydration before winter is over. You pick it in October, you put it in a cool corner of your basement or a spare room, and by January, half of it has gone soft or started to smell or shriveled down to nothing. It is frustrating because you did all the work of growing it and storing it just to watch it go bad before you can use it. Rebecca loses almost none of her cabbage. Her method takes about 30 seconds per head. She takes each cabbage head individually and wraps it in 3 layers of dry newspaper. Not 1 layer. 3. She wraps it snugly, like she is putting it to bed, as she calls it. Then she places the wrapped heads into a plain cardboard box and closes the lid. The box goes into an unheated mudroom, stairwell, garage corner, or basement area that stays somewhere between 32 and 45 degrees through the winter. That is it. That is the whole technique. 3 layers of newspaper, a cardboard box, an unheated space. I did not believe her when she first described it. It sounds almost too simple to work. I kept waiting for the complicated part. Here is why it works, and the science behind it is actually interesting, even though the method could not be more low-tech. Cabbage in storage has three enemies. The first is moisture loss. If cabbage loses moisture too fast, the outer leaves dry out and the inner leaves follow. The second enemy is a gas called ethylene, which ripening and rotting produce naturally. When one cabbage head starts to go bad, the ethylene it releases speeds up the decline of every cabbage near it. The third enemy is temperature swings. If the temperature bounces up and down repeatedly, the cabbage heads respond to the warming as a signal to start growing and deteriorating. Newspaper wrapped 3 layers thick wicks away just enough surface moisture to prevent rot while also preventing the head from drying out completely. The cardboard box blocks light and acts as insulation against temperature swings. Most importantly, each head being wrapped individually means that if one starts to go bad, the newspaper and the box contain that process. One bad head does not take out the whole batch. Researchers at Michigan State who studied cabbage storage found that the ideal holding temperature is right between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is exactly the natural temperature of most unheated mudrooms, basement stairwells, and enclosed garages through a northern winter. No root cellar required, no special equipment, no electricity. I started doing this 4 years ago after hearing about it from Rebecca. Before, I was losing about half my cabbage crop to rot or freezer burn by January. In a good year, I might get 3 months of storage out of my best heads. Last year, I pulled the final cabbage head out of a cardboard box in my basement stairwell on March 18th. I had put it in there back in early October. It had been sitting in that box, wrapped in 3 layers of newspaper, for over 5 months. When I unwrapped it, the outer leaves were a little loose, but inside the head was firm and white and smelled clean and fresh. My wife made coleslaw that night from a cabbage that had been living in a cardboard box in a stairwell since before Thanksgiving. Nothing fancy, no electricity, no root cellar, just newspaper and a box and a cool corner. Rebecca and her family eat coleslaw in March. Fresh, crisp coleslaw from cabbage they grew the previous summer, stored in one of the cheapest and simplest methods imaginable, and they do it year after year without fail. Now you can do the same thing. Section 6. What this actually looks like in your garden. I want to be practical here at the end because I know how easy it is to watch a video like this and feel inspired and then go back to ordering the same seed catalog you always order and end up with the same garden you have always had. So let me give you something concrete. If you are starting from scratch or you want to make a serious change this season, here is the simplest possible version of the Amish approach. Pick your biggest, sunniest piece of ground and put potatoes in it. Seed potatoes are cheap, they are easy to plant, they require minimal attention through the summer, and they produce more food per square foot than almost anything else you can grow. Even a 10 by 10 foot bed, done right, can give you 50 or 60 pounds of potatoes that will sit in a cool, dark corner and feed you through winter. Next to the potatoes, put 2 or 3 rows of storage cabbage. Not fancy ornamental cabbage, not Napa cabbage for fresh eating, storage cabbage. Varieties bred to be dense, heavy, and long-lasting. Danish ballhead is a classic. Premium late Dutch is another one. These are the kinds that produce heads so tight and firm they feel almost like cannonballs when you pick them up. Those are the ones that last in storage. Add 1 corner for butternut squash and let the vines run where they want to go. Give them room. 2 or 3 plants will produce more food than you expect. That is your February garden. Potatoes, storage cabbage, butternut squash. Everything else you grow is a bonus. Tomatoes for fresh eating and canning. Cucumbers for pickles. Peppers if you love them. Herbs in pots by the door. Zucchini in one corner that will absolutely try to take over the world if you let it. All of that is great. Enjoy it. But it fills in around the edges of your main production. The main production is the stuff that goes in the cellar. And when October comes and you have cabbages to store, wrap them 1 by 1 in 3 layers of dry newspaper, put them in a cardboard box, and slide that box into the coolest, unheated corner of your house. Then forget about them until you need one. Check on them once a month. If one feels soft through the wrapping, Pull it out and use it right away. The others will be fine. This is not a complicated system. It is not expensive. It does not require a root cellar or a special refrigerator or a vacuum sealer or any of the equipment the gardening industry would love to sell you. It requires good seeds, decent soil, consistent water, and the wisdom to plant what feeds you through February instead of what looks good in a catalog photo. The Amish figured this out over generations because they had to. Nobody was going to drive to the grocery store when things got thin in January. The cellar was all there was, so the cellar had to be full, and the garden had to put it there. You do not have to be in a situation that desperate to benefit from the same thinking. Even if you can drive to a store anytime you want, there is something deeply satisfying about opening that cardboard box in March and pulling out a firm, fresh cabbage head that your hands grew 6 months ago. There is something real about a pantry shelf lined with butternuts that you grew from seeds and harvested yourself. There is a particular feeling that comes from knowing that your family could eat well for months on what you put up, even if the stores were empty tomorrow. That is what a working garden actually feels like. And the 7 vegetables on this list are the gap between the garden you have and the garden that can do that for you. If you are still here, I appreciate you spending this time with me. I hope something in this video changes the way you think about your garden this season, even if it is just one swap. Even if it is just putting potatoes where your corn used to be, or trying the newspaper and cardboard box trick with your first batch of storage cabbage. If you found this useful, please hit the like button and subscribe. I have a lot more of this coming. Deep dives into how traditional communities grow food, preserve it, and think about the land in ways that most modern gardeners have never encountered. If you have a question about your specific zone or what you would swap first, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Here is my question for you this week. What is one vegetable you are giving up way too much space to in your garden right now, and what would you put in its place? Let me know below. And before you go, check out the video right up here about traditional root vegetable storage methods that work without any electricity at all. You will not want to miss it.